Hi, I'm Marcus Coward, and this is Wake Up New Bedford. I'm here with Andrew O'Leary. Andrew, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Excited.
So, of course, plenty of people know you, and they may just know you for the title, they may know you personally. But for those who don't know you, explain a little bit about yourself to the audience, and maybe tell us a little bit about where you come from, where you grew up, and we can start with that.
Sure. So I'm Andrew O'Leary. Currently, I'm the superintendent of New Bedford Public Schools. Most importantly, I'm a parent of 5, three of whom were at New Bedford High School. So I guess in theory, I'm a very busy guy in terms of being a dad and being superintendent of New Bedford Schools. So I've been in New Bedford close on 20 years, which is kind of strange to say. 20 years ago, I came to Massachusetts from Ireland, and I wrapped up my graduate studies over here and then moved to New Bedford. And great place to get started working in and around New Bedford was New Bedford Schools. I started there and have been there ever since. So I know nothing else but New Bedford Schools, which has a lot of advantages.
Sure.
So I'm pretty proud of that.
So you're from Ireland?
Yeah, I'm from County Cork in Ireland.
Okay.
Along the way, I lost my accent, which, when I do revisit Ireland, I know I'm going to get a hard time about that. But,
sure.
I'm too busy to worry about that.
So, okay, this is going to sound super random. I guess I've never asked an Irish person this question, but is St. Patrick's Day like a big holiday?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it just in Massachusetts or in the U.S. or?
No, in Ireland it's a big holiday.
Sure.
It's a big festival. Okay. And there aren't many equivalent, right? So I guess if you think about parades that we would see over here in Mass, and especially in New Bedford, Cape Verdean Parade is a big day. One of the biggest in New Bedford, 4th of July is a big day, Memorial Day. I think all of that is centered in Ireland. That's pretty much the main parade. So when I was a kid, all the floats would go by and big colorful parade. And so that's one of the biggest things about St. Patrick's Day. It is the day for those colorful parades and floats, and the entire community come out and contribute. And then in theory, it's a religious day of obligation. So St. Patrick is a saint, a canonical saint in Catholicism as well. So it's a day of obligation. And then it's a day too where people do imbibe and enjoy drinking and partying as well, which certainly we can see as part of the tradition as well. So it is a big day. But it is a little different. It is a little more formal in Ireland. So,
looking back, was coming to New Bedford kind of random, or is it kind of a hub for immigrants? I mean, right now, but then also, when you came over 20 years ago.
Yeah, I would say it was random for me. I actually first went to Albany, New York, and finished up my studies there. And I had met my wife a couple of years before, and she is from the region. She's from, her family grew up in New Bedford as well.
Sure.
So it was a hub for her, and then we moved from Albany down to the New Bedford region, and we decided to stay here as well. So it certainly wasn't deliberate, but it was very fortunate nonetheless.
Sure. And then, so what did you go to school for?
Political science. So political science and history have always been my passion, especially history. And so I'm a licensed social studies history educator in Massachusetts. I was a teacher of history, an instructor in history at Bristol Community College for 10 years as well, which I really enjoyed.
Interesting.
And I miss a lot. Okay. So if you're not careful, and you could get me defaulting into a history lecture at any given point. Okay. So you've got to be careful. So when I'm in meetings or when I'm talking to my kids, all of a sudden the history instructor, history professor will come out.
Sure.
Because I'm very passionate about history, about the discipline of history, about the lessons of history, about scholarship in history. So you can see I'm getting started on the history track.
No, I love history too. I was just going to let you keep going. But what is your favorite part of history, or is there one that you really specialized in?
I mean, every time you learn something new about history and you can actually apply the tools of history and the tools of scholarship, you can get excited about any part of history. I learned that. So when I was first introduced to black history, when I started studying in upstate New York, I didn't know much about it, and so all of a sudden you start to see there's a rich scholarship there. There's a lot of hidden history there, and Black history especially. I think we all know that now. I think back when I was studying it in 2003, it was kind of unknown. So that was really exciting to learn about all the scholarship about the Atlantic slave trade, to learn about the rich vein of scholarship that had been hidden in the Caribbean and in HBCUs and things like that. So we all know more about that now with great studies like the 1619 Project. But then even ancient history, ancient Greece and Rome is really fascinating and exciting. And there's been actually, so we have that kind of dry history of ancient Greece and Rome from 50 years ago, but actually more recently people have seen that those cultures are very diverse, and there's a lot more new scholarship with diverse scholars recently as well, and I've got a real interest in World War II as well. Just I've always had that since I was a kid.
You're not alone.
I could keep going on history. It's just a wonderful discipline, and as important as ever.
Yeah, my favorite subject. Yeah, I'm definitely a history guy.
Because when I hear people say I hate history, it really bothers me, and I'm like, well, okay, let's talk.
Yeah, it's probably like the most important subject in a lot of ways, besides like math, maybe. But history is. There's so much to it, and especially when you're able to apply it to current events and to apply it to your thinking, to how you view things and your perspective, it can really shift how you think about things that's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's about scholarship, it's about expertise, it's about agendas. Everybody who puts pen to paper to discuss or reflect on or write or emphasize or de-emphasize a historical subject, there's a bias there, and I'm saying bias in a neutral way. But there's a perspective, there's a debate, there's an argument. Why is this being emphasized and this being de-emphasized? Okay, what does that tell us? What does that tell us about how we're perceiving the world today? Because a few years from now, what's happening now is historical, and there'll be different perspectives on it. So there's really a lot of skills you can gain, especially in this kind of fractured media age. There's really a lot of skills you can gain by studying history.
And so growing up, what did you see yourself doing? Were you always interested in history or in political science? Or
yeah, definitely. And I was thinking recently, it was the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall back in November. And I think it would have been 2024, so what was that, the 35th anniversary? It can be hard to figure out the dates. So the Berlin Wall falls November 9th, 1989, right? So November's the anniversary. I'm reflecting, I grew up at a time with a lot of history. So the Cold War was ending, right? You had Reagan and Gorbachev. You had Solidarity in Poland and all of that. So I was watching all this on TV, and cable TV was new, and it was a really fascinating time. Mandela got released from prison. And so as I was a kid growing up watching all of that, I thought, this is really cool. What is this called? And then I went to university, and they said, oh, this is called political science. And I go, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I'm interested in. This is exactly what I love learning about. Policy, political science, international affairs. And so, and I do think, everyone can reflect on their own era growing up, and there was a lot of historical dynamics, but I do think that was something of a unique era. And I was just drinking that up as a kid in Ireland on TV, and then to be able to pursue that in college was just so exciting.
And so were you influenced at all? Do you have any siblings?
Yes, a brother and sister,
Older?
Older brother, younger sister,
So were you influenced by what your older brother chose to do, or what your parents chose to do, or was this just your own fascination that you took and ran with?
Yeah, I think it was just my own fascination, but I do think that, Ireland being in the middle of the world, and Ireland as a country when I was growing up wasn't very wealthy or anything like that, so it was very much, Ireland had to take an interest in the world, right? And Irish people went all over the world. They were immigrants all over the world, immigrants from Ireland, immigrants in other countries. So, and then I do think Ireland invested a lot in education, and so my generation was very fortunate. Ireland is considered today a wealthy country, not when I was growing up. And so there's a great story there about investing in young people. So when I was about to go to college, it was going to be a financial strain. Then the Irish government said, we're going to pay for everyone's tuition.
That's amazing.
It is, and it was an investment, right? So they said, okay, companies are coming into Ireland, building pharmaceutical plants, building computer technology plants. How can we help that? Oh, I know, we'll invest in our people and they can become future engineers, future pharmacology techs, and so on. Now, I went into political science teaching and learning, so I don't know if they had me in mind, but I benefited from that. And so it was an interesting time to see all that playing out. So but think about that. That's politics, right? Politics is investing in people, policies that were adopted in Ireland. So I was observing all that, and I still think about those lessons as we're applying them today. How are our students at New Bedford High doing? Well, should Massachusetts invest more in them? So
Sure.
it all comes full circle.
And so, with your interest being in both history but political science, did you see yourself being more so of a politician rather than an educator?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you show an interest in that, people reflect it back and say, oh, you should go into politics.
Yeah,
Oh, you
yeah.
know, that's where you're headed. You're in political science. I know what that is. That's politics. That's politicians, right? But that's not really true. And politicians are only one part of that realm, because everything we do is policy, right? From the speed limit to local elections to municipal government, all of that. There's a real deep series of policies, procedures, practices, and political science that we see every day. Politics isn't just about the politicians who, especially in this day and age, are really more of almost like an infotainment realm.
Sure.
And so that wasn't really what attracted me. What really attracted me was seeing how all of this comes together. It's really fascinating. It's like being an engineer. It's sociology, it's social science, it's seeing how society comes together, how people organize, how people advocate, when laws are adopted, how that impacts people. That's political science, not cable TV or people burnishing their image or things like that.
Sure. And so was it challenging for you at all when you were going through school, learning these different subjects with political science and tracking all of this, or did it come kind of naturally for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was challenging. So the irony is, I did study a lot of finance and accounting, and I wasn't very successful initially at that.
Sure.
And so the political science and the policy and writing, I really enjoyed writing, and so writing about political movements and history, a lot of writing in history, as I studied it as well, so the economics, but I did pick up a lot of that. So this was the irony, because one of my big jobs in New Bedford was being director, essentially the financial director, the business manager, the CFO.
Really?
And so my mother, when I call her, she'll joke with me and tease me and say, oh, well, let's look at your undergrad grades in finance and financial accounting. I say, no, we don't need to talk about that right now. But I just think that's interesting. And it also teaches me some lessons about, I can grasp those concepts now. Something I reflect upon, I can grasp those concepts now. And when I was 18 or 19, I had trouble learning accounting concepts.
Sure.
So that teaches me something about, students learn differently. So that was a big lesson I took away from that as well.
And growing too.
Yeah.
Like even if you aren't the most successful in a certain topic, that you can still grow and learn what you are good at and then find that passion.
Yeah, and there's a new concept now that we focused on a lot more. If you think about students who are in third grade and they're not mastering the third grade outcomes. And the theory is, and you see it in some states, okay, we'll just keep them back in third grade until they master the concepts. And if you do that, your third grade data looks wonderful, right? And your fourth grade data looks wonderful. But does that really benefit the young person? Now, if the young person proceeds into fourth grade and you have other strategies to accelerate them, at the same time we learn more about cognitive development and how people develop physically and in terms of essentially their brain power. And so as they grow, they will have the ability to grasp those concepts. So you can accelerate rather than the simplistic idea of just holding everyone back until you get it. So there's a lot of that discussion still going on. So I think of my own experience when we have those discussions.
Sure. And so your first job when you came to New Bedford was what?
Teaching.
Teaching.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So I'd been working in upstate New York in the State House and the legislature, and came to New Bedford, and I'm very interested in teaching and learning anyway. That's what's always fascinated me. And so I started teaching as a substitute teacher in New Bedford schools. And that's really interesting because you get to see all different kinds of schools. Now I went to a very traditional, I guess you could call it conservative Catholic school system in Ireland. And so in terms of coming to New Bedford, it was very different. The American schooling system was very different. So that took a little getting used to. And then as a substitute teacher, you would be put in elementary, but you could be put in middle school.
Sure.
And man, I was not ready for middle school. That was like, oh, wow. Because middle school kids are they're in-betweeners, right? I always say you need to be on their wavelength.
Yeah,
and we have wonderful educators whose passion is middle school, because kids at that age are so engaging, so exciting. A lot of goofballs at middle school, right?
For sure.
And then you can really see their personalities developing for the first time. But
that's a great way to put it.
Again, if you're in your 20s and all you know is traditional conservative schooling, you're not ready for middle schoolers' personalities.
Yeah.
But so that's why I'm always fascinated. I'm always admiring middle school educators, middle educators, because they can tune in to a student's wavelength and really allow them to blossom and get into their own personality. So I started out that way, and I learned a lot quickly, and then I learned, and then that was the start of my journey in New Bedford Public Schools.
And so rewinding a little bit, so when you were in Albany, you were working in the State House on legislature.
Yeah.
Were you enjoying that?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. You see a lot. You know, you're in the halls of power, and Albany's a really curious place because New York New York thinks it's the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And in some respects, New York City is.
Sure.
Right? And so you have a lot of power in New York City. The mayor of New York is a very powerful position. The governor splits his or her time between the city and Albany. And Albany is this weird city in that it's a small city. It's not much bigger than New Bedford, but the halls of power are there.
It's the capital.
So it's the capital. It's the state capital. So all the major decisions are made there. So it's a really interesting place.
That is interesting.
And there is so much politics going on. And I don't say that in a negative way, but it's just policies swirling around. So one day you could be meeting prison reform groups. The next day you could be meeting somebody who wants to pass a stop red light bill. You could be meeting a sheriff from Buffalo, New York, which is a whole other different world than New York City. You could be meeting people who are talking about rent control. So I'm thirsty for knowledge. I'm just soaking all this up.
Yeah.
And you can start to see how all the world works. You know what else you see, though? You see corruption. And you see the dark side of politics.
Sure.
And like I said, that never really interested me.
That's
the
good
kind
to
of
hear. Yeah.
Big personalities, you know, the big egos. And, you know, we've seen the negative side of politics, right, in terms of politicians do get a negative portrayal,
Sure.
and some earn that, being somewhat ego-driven and things like that. So I learned that too. Albany had a lot of problems that came out in terms of corruption. Anyone can Google it. There was a lot of corruption in Albany, and really observing that, it was very disappointing. But also, being young at the time, I learned a lot of lessons there as well. That
Sure.
wow, this shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like this, and maybe politics, frontline politics, isn't really what interests me. I'd much rather the work behind the scenes that's moving things for people.
And so when that corruption was going on, was it really in hindsight when you realized that? Or when it was going on, you could see it and feel it too?
Yeah, I was relatively new to it, but there were a lot of headlines. I mean, it really is remarkable, just looking at it from a data perspective, how many folks in the New York State Legislature ended up in trouble with the law. It really is fascinating. You had the speed. This is all public record. These are high-profile cases, and you had people like prosecutors who made their name with this, Preet Bharara and Elliot Spitzer when he was a prosecutor, who were pursuing corruption as well. And it was almost like it's really interesting because it was almost like just part of the scene there. And the newspapers it was almost like an ecosystem. The newspapers would write about it. Politicians would pursue their own interests. There would be corruption in this big economic development program, and then there would be some corruption or rumors of corruption over here. It was almost part of the ecosystem and the culture, which would make for great TV shows and things like that. But seeing it up close, it was a little eye-opening. Yeah.
Sure. And so did that? And so you said this a little bit, but that turned you off from big politics and really turned you in the direction of seeing what goes on behind the scenes?
Yeah, it did. I think it turned me off, and it was a bit of an eye-opening thing. Yeah, it turned me off, and become much more interested in the real impactful work rather than shallow politics.
So then, but how do you get the idea to become an educator, though?
Yeah.
Because those are different fields, you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to surprise anybody, but that wasn't necessarily my number one plan. You know, it's like that joke, right? Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And most people never know.
Sure.
So coming to New Bedford, I think it was just maybe starting out as teaching was just something, when I first came to the city, it was an opportunity because I had my undergrad and I had my master's degree as well, so it was a great opportunity.
Sure.
And then an opportunity opened up to say, hey, you're really good at writing, you understand policy, you understand the financial allocations from my work in the State House. So then I started writing grants for New Bedford schools. And there was a time when New Bedford schools' budget was having a tough time, so grants were huge. So getting a grant for a couple $100,000 to do actually a teaching history program with BCC, getting a grant for a couple $100,000 to do school security initiatives, learning about other grants. Again, this was another great opportunity to learn a lot of things. And so then about a year after starting teaching, I got the job as the director of federal and state grants for New Bedford.
That's huge.
Yeah, it was huge at the time. I was like, wow, this is a big job.
Yeah.
A little intimidating. What's that called? Imposter syndrome. It's like, am I really up to this?
Yeah.
You know? let me just write, and I wrote really well. So I was successful, pretty successful in that gig. Yeah.
Sure. And you were there for how long?
Yeah, I did that for about 10 years.
Wow,
And, yeah,
okay.
and then that's great because you learn so much. As you're writing about programs, you're learning about programs. So now I'm learning about education policy works and learning about how teaching and learning works and how New Bedford operates. And then you're learning the finances as well.
Yes, yeah.
So now I'm learning the finances. Okay, what is procurement? How do I really budget something? If I put 25 staff in this program, how do I verify that? How does labor law work? And you're learning all of these things. And you know, you're making mistakes and you're working with the state and learning what they demand, and you're working with your colleagues. And so I'll always be grateful for the opportunity New Bedford gave me to have that big job and then learn on the job. And a lot of people mentored me, and a lot of great people during that time as well.
And do you feel like that was still in the umbrella of politics, would you say?
Yeah, I would say it's policy. That's policy implementation,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Think about a grant. Think about a grant, right? And we used to joke, rule number one in the grant world is don't ever apply for a grant, right? So,
Okay, explain, please.
well, you don't want, because in theory, a grant is you're adopting new money. So the idea that a grant is a gift is wrong. So if you look at any grant, somebody wrote a law that said we're going to try this initiative, we're going to try a new reading program, we're going to try a new counseling program. And they wrote that and said, how are we going to decide how to fund this? Well, we don't have money to give it to everybody, and we don't know if it's going to work. Create a grant. Okay, so grant is not, so all of a sudden now there's rules, right? They want you to do a certain program or curriculum, and you're one of the only few people who gets it, which means you're going to have to do something very specific that somebody else wants you to do, and you're going to have to follow rules, and they're going to be looking over your shoulder, and they're going to give you a lot of money to do it. So that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
Rule number one, don't apply for a grant. Who needs that? Who needs that pressure, right?
Okay.
And so there's that tension between, well, you want the money, because especially in gateway cities that had been traditionally underfunded, you want more money, but all of a sudden you're adopting a program that someone else is going to tell you what to do, or you have to follow their rules. That's what a grant truly is.
Yeah.
And so when I used to give grant trainings, I would point that out. You know, when you get a grant, they'll say, oh, great job. The newspaper wants to do an article because you just got $250,000 from New Bedford. It's like, okay, great. But now, guess what? You just created a whole body of work for yourself, and now so that's the kind of joke we used to have. Is like, congratulations, you've just made your job even harder.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a wonderful thing to learn how things work, to see policy in action, and I learned a heck of a lot doing that. Yeah.
And so after that, that's when you start teaching at BCC?
Yeah.
Okay.
Halfway through that, I started teaching at BCC, and I was teaching U.S. history. I was teaching ancient history. It was called Western Civ at the time as well. Those kinds of things. So it was great. Great interacting with students. It was funny. It was before phones, right? Took us over. So students would be a lot more interactive in the class, and I still meet students who still talk about it. I was chatting with one last week, and she said, oh, I remember we were talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was from ancient Near East, Sumeria, Babylon, and we talked, and she still remembered some of that, and said, talked about what was memorable or exciting about the course. So that is just so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, any teacher will tell you that. That's why teaching is such a wonderful profession, like kind of what I said about middle school, just your ability to see students grow. Your ability to interact with students. There's no greater profession than that. There's no better validation. In other professions, you do a good job or you reach a milestone. But in teaching, your milestone is every day. You get that immediate feedback every day. You're validated every day. You can really make an impact every day. There's no other profession like teaching. It is just wonderful. And so again, if anyone's watching this and wants to become a teacher, New Bedford Schools is the place for you. You will see that every day.
Sure.
But just be a little patient because there are no naturals in teaching. I was told that when I started, oh, you're a natural. And then I learned, no, I'm not a natural. There's a lot to learn about being an effective educator, but we have so many of them in New Bedford.
And so we have a few minutes left in this episode. And so last question, you can really expand on this. As you're getting these different positions and jobs, do you feel like you're building up your resume to something, or are you just kind of taking it as you go and you're really just enjoying each thing, or is there something that you're trying to strive for with taking these different positions?
Yeah, I mean, now I get older, I can talk like the old man and reflect, right? Sure. And now I see my kids senior in high school and so forth. It's like, how does that work? How does that happen? What do you do in your career? How do you grow?
Yeah.
And I just think, like reflecting on my own personality, I'm just very curious. I love learning, right? So I every time I was learning something, so it was never boring, right? It was never boring. And then let's be honest about it. There was a lot of kind of politics or change over the past 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we would have had changes in the state and saying, oh, New Bedford schools are underperforming, and changes in the superintendency. I worked for multiple bosses, so there was a lot going on. New Bedford had good times and bad times, and I became very protective, defensive, supportive of New Bedford. I'm very passionate about New Bedford, because I saw when we got unfairly critiqued, I saw when we could do a better job over here or over there, and I just saw the potential. So as I'm working for New Bedford, I'm becoming more, maybe I'm falling in love with New Bedford, I'm becoming more passionate about it, and that's really what I carry today.
Sure. And so when you're having these different positions, when you're teaching, when you're working in the grant writing, are you aware of the superintendent, like in the school committee, or was that something just kind of,
No,
over
I was
here?
aware that I was always close to the center,
Sure,
right? I was
okay.
close to the center, and I was able to build relationships. And I think that's a good thing about New Bedford. It's always like Goldilocks. It's not too big. It's not too small.
Sure.
It's not too small. So there's a lot going on, and it's intersecting with a lot of things going on nationally and state. And then it's not too big, so you can meet everybody. So I'm
Sure.
building relationships and working on this project with some early childhood folks, or working on a college project. So I'm meeting people and developing my skills, and then seeing how everything works. So again, just a wonderful opportunity to learn everything.
And so, sure, you're aware and working in that sphere and close to the center. Was this a goal of yours, would you say, to have become superintendent?
No, I just always wanted to be a history teacher.
Sure.
That's all.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all I ever wanted to be. And if I could drop everything and go back and be a history instructor again, 24/7, 365 days a year, I would absolutely do that.
Sure.
So no, it wasn't really my goal, but I knew that I learned a lot. I learned a lot about ed policy. I learned a lot about what worked. I learned a lot about what great people we had. And so I did feel a responsibility to kind of elevate that. And I
Sure.
did feel, wait a second, I think I can help. And so that's kind of what led me over the past 3 or 4 years, when there were opportunities to be in the leadership role. I was like, yeah, I think I can do this. And I've seen how it's done right and how it's done wrong. And I truly believe in our city. So that's what got me there.
Okay. So this has been part 1 with Andrew O'Leary, talking about how he came to America, found New Bedford, got started in education in his career in New Bedford, and you can catch us in part 2, where we're going to talk a little bit more about his position with being a superintendent, some of the challenges, maybe some of his favorite stories, and we'll continue on with his future. Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm running,